Right. So I was saying that I was trying to think of a way that other people would be able to use one of my eyes to benefit themselves. Um, why was my eye swollen that badly? And I did think of, I did take into consideration that someone could be using my eye for the same reason that I use my eye, um, you know, as a lens to see through. And this was the only thing that I could think of, the only way that they could benefit from using one of my eyes. And as far as Neuralinking me went, between what I imagine could possibly be going on between my eye and a potential neural implant, um, I began to understand that there could very well be, entire teams of scientists or potentially a lot of other people who would be sharing, my point of view with me, and they could also potentially have access to my thoughts, my physiology, whatever could be picked up about me. I understood that basically there could be a whole team of scientists in my head. I know that uh, I would end up in the hospital a lot over what they did. They would start sending me to an ophthalmologist and a neurologist, and I was expected to make it to that bigger city away from my smaller, crappier city, even though we were like completely broke poor. I was expected to every 2 weeks travel to this bigger city so that I would be seen for my eyes and for my brains. And mind you, the entire time all of this is going on, I know all of these people are lying to me. They diagnosed me with something called idiopathic intracranial hypertension, or IIH. It was also known as pseudotumor cerebri. And they've got like a lot of little Facebook groups and online groups and stuff for all of these mostly women who have intracranial hypertension. And, idiopathic, meaning that they don't know why, when they sure as heck do know why. And at the very same time that all of this has begun to go on, all of this horribleness has begun to go on, I'm given an iPhone. And what I've begun to gather after all this time is that some of the tech that we are implanted with, it doesn't technically work all of it together the way that they want, and they're not able to map your brain and everything else that they need to, unless you have your phone in your face 24/7, basically. Unless you're on your phone, the way that James Martinez described it is that not all of the technology works for everything unless you basically have your phone in your face for 6 to 12 hours a day. And that has to do with what I was talking about, like the DARPA, brain mapping and different stuff like that, and probably all kinds of stuff that I don't have, any knowledge of or access to. I would see this ophthalmologist, and I would have to stick my head in this giant thing that it itself actually looked like an eyeball. It was pretty weird, and I'd have to hit this little button every time I would see these little dots. And what they were doing was they were creating a map of my vision loss. So these implants were basically destroying my vision. There was a lot of pressure against my skull and against my optic nerves. There would eventually be so much pressure that they will perform what's called a lumbar puncture or a spinal tap, which, you know what that means. They're going to stick a big giant needle into your spine and pull out some of your spinal fluid. But anyways, they were mapping my blindness, basically. They were, trying to show how quickly I was going to go blind from what they did. I was telling you about those spells of everything going dark and, me losing my everything, everything but my consciousness. I would lose. I would go through bouts of it. And it was only when this shit began. I was so sick at some point. My ex took me home where my kids and my brother were. I would lay in bed and when I needed something, I would call out for them and they would not respond. Let me back this up just a little bit. They end up hospitalizing me where they pretend they don't know what's happening. They're giving me all these blood thinners every day. They started giving me a medication called Diamox, which was a diuretic. And I basically could not take any pain relievers at all. Anytime that I would take any painkiller, pain reliever, a hydrocodone, anything like that, I would end up sick as a dog on the floor, throwing up. I remember when my ex took me, his name was Joe, when he took me from Ruby Memorial, from the big hospital that I was at, back to our little town, I remember on the way back, we stopped 2 different times for me to throw up. I was having to throw up all over the road. I was having to throw up. I had him stop at a fucking car dealership where I opened the door and puked all over the front of this car dealership. Any store that we stopped at, puke, everything, every time the car stopped. It was really bad. It was really severe, and the pain that I was in, I couldn't take medication for. If I took medication, I'd get even sicker. And I don't know if that was because they were doing something to the medication to make it to where I couldn't take it, or if that was just a natural reaction to them putting things in my brain. When I would go to lay down, the back of my head would hurt so bad, and it would feel wrong against any pillow at all. I found myself not using pillows to lay down. I would just have to lay down and just let the back of my head just lay there. And it was just so uncomfortable. There was no way to get comfortable on a pillow, and there was no way to get comfortable without a pillow. It was absolutely excruciating and horrible. And I just thought to myself, I really wish that these guys would have been intelligent enough just to wait a few years until they had some smaller implant or microchip to place into a brain. I just didn't understand why they were so stupid and careless with someone's brain as to just want to take and implant them with anything like that. But I knew that I had haters, and I knew that people legitimately hated me, and they were working against me, and that they were constantly setting up all these nasty things to happen. And I was only 27 years old when this began, whenever I basically was Neuralinked. I was only 27. I had 2 kids who I loved very much. I had lived my whole life poor and in isolation, basically up until then. Sure, I had friends and I knew people and stuff, but all of those people were actually getting paid to make sure that I didn't hang out with anyone else and that I stayed isolated to just them. I developed this tinnitus type thing, which was it began that instead of losing my hearing, I would begin to hear this horrible high pitch, ring, just this ring thing that would just happen out of the blue. It was so terrible. Like, I would get up to walk across the room and I'd be like mid-stride in the middle of doing things and everything would just go black. I wouldn't be able to see or hear anything. It was so terrible. And I would just have to stand there and stare out and just wait for everything to come back. For the first time in my life, I couldn't look down like this because something is now wrong with the back of my head, making it to where whenever I look up, look down, look side to side, certain ways, like I don't have the same range of motion that I had before they did this to me. There's certain things that, especially right after it happened, I would pass out if I tried to do them. If I tried to lay down on my stomach, I would literally, circulation would be cut off to my brain and I would begin to pass out. If I raised my hands above my head, I would begin to pass out. Even if I was going to try to hurry up and put a thumbtack in the wall, by the time I actually got the thumbtack put in the wall, I would be passing out while I was standing up. I began to have to be very, very careful when I involved myself in adult extracurricular activities because it suddenly didn't take very much to be too rough because of how I had to hold my head a certain way constantly to make sure that I wasn't losing my vision, losing my circulation. Like I said, they started giving me Diamox, knowing that I didn't actually need it, pretending that they didn't know what was wrong with me. So not only did they commit the initial atrocity, but they then couldn't give me any pain relief, and they prescribed me a medication that wasn't going to help that I didn't need. They would end up giving me a spinal tap, like I said, a lumbar puncture. I think that they gave me 2 spinal taps within 2 to 3 days of each other. They ended up creating an entrance in my spine that made it to where while I was laying there, my spinal fluid was leaking out all over the bed that I was laying on, all over the gurney stretcher thing or whatever that I was laying on. They did that deliberately. They deliberately opened up my spinal cavity, my spinal column, so much that my spinal fluid was leaking out everywhere. And then they assigned a surgeon to give me something called a spinal blood patch. I ended up refusing the spinal blood patch. No, you're not just going to give me a third surgery to fake correct your first 2 surgeries and then me end up in worse condition that I'm already in. So yeah, I ended up going back to my crappy house where I, like I said, laid in bed, and once in a while I would actually need help or get hungry or whatever. So I would call on my brother and my boyfriend, who were able-bodied adult leeches, who were hanging out in the living room, watching my kids, who basically were the biggest victims of all of this. They would just ignore me whenever I would call out for help. My brother and boyfriend, I guess they thought that I was just going to die. So they thought that if they just ignored me, that I would just die. But I wasn't just going to die. So I would literally have to get on my hands and knees and crawl into the bathroom, where I had to clean the fucking whole floor and everything by myself, because I was going to have to live on my bathroom floor down by my toilet for about a week or 2. I would crawl into the kitchen. I would make my own food and take it back into the bedroom for myself. And I very slowly but surely began to nurse myself back to health on my own. While I was in your shitty hospitals, you guys chose to ignore me and treat me like trash. No one would help me brush my hair. or wash my hair or take showers or anything. No one helped me with anything. They would complain and yell at me if I didn't pee in this hat. They, for some reason, thought that they needed to see how much I was peeing every single day. It was the only thing they were concerned with. They were not concerned with helping me get cleaned up. Like I said, they weren't concerned with helping me with any of my hygienic needs or anything like that. They were purely focused on just being trash. They were shooting me up all the time with blood thinners that I didn't need. I've never needed blood thinners in my whole life. They came in and asked me if I had herpes in front of everyone, wondering if I had Addison's disease. They said, we don't know if you have Addison's disease or not. So they asked me if I had herpes in front of everyone. Doctors, nurses, my family, everyone. Yeah, they just let me lay in a puddle of my own cerebrospinal fluid for about 3 days. Before they did this to me, my kids had actually just started school. And I was actually in a really good place mentally, physically, spiritually, as far as what I had to work with. Okay. I was walking my kids to school and back every day. We'd started out on a really good, in a really good way that year. They were doing great. I was doing great. I was enjoying walking them back and forth from school. I was enjoying helping them with school, with their schoolwork, with their homework, all of that. We started out really great and we were doing really great. It was actually the first year that we were actually doing that great. And I just found out I was going to be moving to a bigger apartment. It was kind of a really cool big deal. And then they did that to us, and then I began to have a really hard time walking my kids to school and back, which was only 2 blocks away. I began to have to use a cane to walk my children to school and back at the age of 27. At the age of 27, I suddenly had an invisibility. I'm sorry. At the age of 27, I suddenly had an invisible disability. No one else could see it, feel it, diagnose it, or anything. It was just for me to suffer with by myself and to figure out how to overcome on my own. I was pretty sure that I had been illegally, secretly Neuralinked, and for all I knew, I was going to be the first person or one of the first people to ever have to overcome such severe treatment and such severe illegal medical, such a severe medical crime, basically. I basically realized I might be one of the first people to have to overcome something like this on their own. And that basically the whole world was going to be against me. I didn't know what I had done actually to deserve being treated so badly along the way, and for mine and my children's lives to be sabotaged like that. But I accepted that it was something that was happening nevertheless. My children went from being really happy, which they really deserved. They really needed a mom who was upbeat and capable for them. They went from being really happy to having to live in the same house with one of my kids' dads, who's a piece of shit, and my brother, who's not really that great either, while their mom was bedridden. And so now they've just got people around them who are just going to ignore them and treat them like trash and not help them and treat them like they're burdensome. And so the quality of life for my children and I fell drastically. And it basically, I just had to adjust to that and just had to try to it was a really terrible chapter of my life that basically no one knows about. Except for the people who did it to me and the people who are trying to keep it a secret. It's been absolutely terrible. This is not the full story. I'm going to end this part of it here, and I'm going to go smoke a fatty.